The bet. Once there was a very famous king named Sundhar. He ruled his kingdom, keeping all the etiquettes of a well administration. People enjoyed peace and sumptuousness under his impeccable kingship. With all these advancements in life, the king was a man of vaunts and bets. Unnecessarily, he waged with his courtiers and tried hard to prove his part. One day, a sage came to the palace. The king was so fond of sages and hermits that he hosted them with all respect and simplicity. Thus the sage was warm welcomed to the palace. Like the king, the sage was also a queer person in behavior and nature. But with all that, he was a man of divine powers and skills. On the way of a serious talk on bets and challenges, there arose a question whether there would be fish in all the waters or sources of water. The king claimed that it was impossible, but the sage's opinion was opposite. Everywhere he found contradictory answers, for it was his nature. He said, "Your Majesty, I am sure that there will be fish in all the sources of water." The king was not ready to spare off this topic. He asked, "Can I see fish in a small stream that comes from a steep hill?" The sage said, "Sure, I can prove it." All the courtiers in the court supported this view of the sage. Then the king asked again, "Can you show the sign of a fish in a paddy field?" A lot of fish can be seen in the paddy field. The sage answered. The courtiers supported this view also. But the king was not ready to dash the topic off. At last, the king asked, "I am sure that the coconut is a good source of water. Can you show the presence of a fish in a coconut?" All the courtiers were dumbed by this question. To their awareness, it was also a source of water. They all looked at the sage to see his response. The sage sat there with no change in expression. He said very calmly but gravely, "Yes, Your Honor, fish live even in coconuts." The whole was fallen into a deep silence, and the courtiers looked at each other. The king was irritated a little. In this imprudent nonsense, he very angrily asked, "Can you prove your part?" "Yes, of course. I am ready to prove my words." The king ordered his men to take a coconut to the court. The king's men took a coconut to the court and handed it to the sage. He looked at it for some time and wanted the men to bring a knife. It was obeyed. The sage said to one of the men to cut the coconut into 2 identical halves. When the coconut was cut into 2 halves, to all the courtiers' surprise, there was writhing and swimming a small fish, splashing water out onto the floor. Seeing this sight, all were dumbed again. They all were sure that It was done by the magical power of the sage. He stood up and, without a word to the king, who was still under a trance of surprise, walked away gravely with the expression of a victor.